Okay, welcome back, folks. We are, again, as I stated, we are having to mitigate a little bit of the deficit we have in terms of our time. I understand that the consortium meeting will be a bit delayed as well. Mr. Belrose had just indicated that he'll respect the fact that the session is moving forward, and he will ensure that he assembles folks after this particular session. Hope everybody enjoyed their lunch. Again, I think it's important to state, and I want to maybe just do this right now, because when we wrap up here later this afternoon, there'll be a lot to highlight and summarize, and people to acknowledge, and sponsors to identify, and things like that. But it's always something, when you come into a First Nation community, we are always mindful and recognize that we're always treated well when we go to a First Nation community, and one of those things is that we are fed well. And that in our First Nation communities, you'll often see this, that people gather like this, and they're often not left to their own devices for their meals. That in our communities we provide meals. And again, as such, I would ask that we give the hosts and the cooks and those within the hospitality department here at the casino, at Tsutsina, let's give them a big round of applause. They've did an excellent job here keeping us fed. Okay, so we're going to move forward with the President's Panel. And the President's Panel represents some of the largest companies in the cannabis sector in Canada. The market capitalization of these companies is close to $10 billion. As these companies continue to grow, efforts are being made to include Indigenous peoples in the industry. Today we will hear of those efforts. So we've got a couple panelists here that are very well accomplished, and again, you'll know some of their achievements by the companies that they represent. So Philippe Lucas is responsible for the development and implementation of multiple clinical and observation studies. His oversight in Tillerie's Customer Service Center helps add a patient-centered lens to Tillerie's policies, practices, and internal and external messaging. Complementing his responsibilities at Tillery, Philippe is a PhD student in the University of Victoria's Social Dimensions of Health program and a graduate researcher with the Centre for Addictions Research of British Columbia. His scientific research includes the therapeutic use of cannabis and other substances in the treatment and trauma addiction, and he has been invited to provide expert testimony before the Canadian House of Commons and the Canadian Senate and Supreme Court of British Columbia. Our next panel presenter is Sean Webster, Director of Government and Stakeholder Relations of Federal and Ontario Canopy Growth. Sean Webster joined Canopy Growth as a Director of Government and Stakeholder Relations, Federal and Ontario in April 2018. Sean joined Canopy Growth from Strategic Corps, where he served as a broad range of clients with the federal, provincial, municipal, public affairs needs. Prior to Strategy Corp, he ran his own public affairs consulting company, Chelsea Strategy Group. Prior to forming CSG, Sean served as Director of Governmental Affairs and Public Policy for Enbridge, Canada's largest integrated energy generation, transmission, and distribution company. He was responsible for the company's federal and provincial advocacy and government relations advocacy activities across Canada. Let's give these gentlemen a warm welcome and welcome them to the panel. So what we're going to do is we're going to hear from these gentlemen, and they're going to go through their presentations, and then we're going to just summarize some of the key points, and then we're going to put it out to the conference attendees. So I'm not sure, gentlemen, did you flip a coin, pick straws?
Sure. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Just wait. just wait for my presentation to come up. I want to start out by thanking you all, the organizers, all the people who made this conference happen. It's a real honor to be able to be here amongst everyone who's attending. I'm really excited for this discussion and really look forward to your questions. I also want to share a thought for Howard Silver, who I understand couldn't be here because of health problems. He's the reason I'm here today. He reached out because we've been talking about different research that I've been doing, including some First Nations research that I'm going to be sharing later on today, I think immediately following this panel. And so I want to just say a prayer and send my, my blessings and good thoughts out to Howard Silver, who couldn't be here with us today. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong presentation. That's the presentation I'm doing later, so you get a quick preview. Thanks. So I've been involved in medical cannabis for over 20 years. I started out as a patient. I got diagnosed with hepatitis C in 1995, which I'd gotten when I was 12 years old as a result of tainted blood in Ontario. I had an operation when I was 12, and I was diagnosed in 95. And at the time, I was having trouble finding a safe source of cannabis, which I found to be helpful in helping me deal with some of the side effects of, or some of the effects of hepatitis C, the localized pain, the inflammation, etc. But I was having trouble finding a safe source, and I thought, if a 25-year-old university student's not finding a good source of cannabis, what's a 65-year-old woman diagnosed with cancer going to do? How's she going to find a safe source of cannabis? So in 1999, I opened up the Vancouver Island Compassion Society, one of Canada's first medical cannabis dispensaries. I ran that organization for about 10 years, and while I was doing that, I kept hearing and pushing and advocating for patients, but I'd hear from policymakers, politicians, physicians, that there simply wasn't enough research taking place, and there wasn't enough research to support the medical use of cannabis. And that's when I decided to go back to school to change my vocation. I was studying to be a high school teacher at the time, but I decided to become a cannabis researcher, and that's what's taking me where I am today, with a brief segue as a city councillor in Victoria from 2008 to 2011. I'm going to start out and tell you a little bit about Tilray today. You know, our thesis at Tilray is that cannabis is mainstream medicine, and it's being used by mainstream patients. There's no reason for the stigma around medical cannabis. This is not a radical new treatment. It's not some, you know, if you look up cannabis in PubMed, which is where they publish academic research, you'll find 25,000 publications. If you look up marijuana, you'll find 35,000 publications. So this is the most studied natural herb known to man, and so don't let anyone tell you that cannabis has not been studied or that there isn't enough research. What is true, mind you, is that most of that research has been looking for harms. In fact, the Canadian government, the US government, have spent billions of dollars looking for potential harms associated with cannabis. I'm happy to say that although I'd be the last person to say that cannabis is completely safe for all individuals under all circumstances, compared to a lot of commonly available pharmaceuticals, it is far safer. And so that's why we feel that that cannabis is mainstream medicine used by mainstream patients. We also think that there's a global paradigm shift going on right now. And what we're seeing is a $150 billion industry, which is currently underground, most of it, and it's now surfacing above ground, and this is a very exciting opportunity. And as I'm sure you all know, it's really exciting to be part of an industry while it's expanding, while it's growing, and while it's really in a rapid growth mode. And there's a lot of opportunities for all folks in Canada and internationally who want to get involved in this cannabis industry. We think that trusted brands are going to be key to this evolution as well. And one of the founders of Privateer Holdings, which is the parent company at Tilray, Brendan Kennedy, likes to say that this is a company of investors who want to use brands to bring legalization and end cannabis prohibition around the world. And I couldn't agree more with that. And that ultimately supply chains and multinational partnerships are going to be part of that as well. So I love this slide because it really shows the different industries that cannabis is disrupting right now. And the first one is the pharmaceutical industry. We're here talking about medical cannabis. And all the major pharmaceutical companies around the world right now are looking at ways to benefit from this shift in cannabis regulation. Some of them are using synthetic cannabinoids, and they're looking at different ways to engage the endogenous cannabinoid system that we all have. But some of them are working more directly with the plant. And Tilray is one of those companies in that we have a partnership with Sandoz Canada, which is a division of Novartis. It's one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world, and Novartis is trying to find ways to deal with chronic pain that move us away from opioids. And so that's one of the reasons they've partnered with Tilray, and we're really proud of that partnership. But companies like Pfizer, Mundipharma, Purdue, Teva are all part of that shift as well. And they're around Canada and the US and internationally right now looking for these potential partnerships. Now, the other industry that's really shifting around this is alcohol. And we, of course, famously, and I don't want to steal the thunder of my partner on this panel, famously know about Constellation Brands making a major investment in Canopy Growth. It's the biggest investment in the cannabis space that's ever taken place. And now we've got Molson Coors, InBev, Diageo, Pernod Ricard. They're all looking around to try and find those partnerships, because wherever cannabis is legalized, you see decreases in the amount of alcohol used. So they're looking at ways to be able to replace some of the sales that they're losing to the cannabis industry by becoming part of the cannabis industry. Now, we're also seeing Coca-Cola, Nestle, Pepsi, Red Bull all get involved in this. They missed the vitamin water craze. They've missed a lot of the recent changes when it comes to kind of soft drink and alternative drink consumptions. They don't want to miss out on CBD and THC-based soft drinks, so they're getting involved in this space as well. And then, of course, there's tobacco. With declining tobacco sales going on around the world, the tobacco companies are trying to find ways to use their patents around vaporization within the cannabis space. So they're also looking for partnerships. So these are some of the biggest industries in the world, and cannabis has become a center point of these major industries and the shifts as they look towards the future. Tilray is an international leader in the cannabis space, in medical cannabis and recreational cannabis production, research, and distribution. We have our flagship facility in Nanaimo, BC. It's a $30 million, 60,000 square foot facility. We were the first GMP certified medical cannabis production facility in North America. And GMP stands for Good Manufacturing Practices. And that means that our cannabis is manufactured at the same high standard as traditional pharmaceuticals are. And we wanted to do that for two reasons. We wanted to make sure that Canadians knew they had access to the safest, highest possible quality supply of cannabis. But we also wanted to be able to use our cannabis for clinical research and for distribution internationally. And as a cannabis researcher, I could tell you that it's been a really exciting period to see this renaissance in cannabis research, and that's going to be part of my second presentation today. There's a really exciting phenomenon going on right now that Canada, as the de facto supplier of medical and research-grade cannabis around the world. The US cannot participate in this market right now because the federal government does not recognize the utility of medical cannabis, and certainly they're a long way away from recognizing legal cannabis in terms of recreational use. So the US companies can't export their cannabis internationally, but Canadians can, and as a result of that, Tilray products are currently available in 12 countries on 5 continents. We were the first company to export cannabis in the EU, first company to export in South and Central America, the first company to export in Australia, New Zealand, and most recently we announced an export of cannabis for a clinical trial on essential tremors into the US at University of California, San Diego. Quite remarkable for a Canadian company to be able to export product in the US for clinical trials, and an amazing opportunity for all Canadians to participate, I think, in this global economy. We have a number of cannabis products. We have flower products on the right-hand side here. We also manufacture capsules and oils, and we like to tell it like it is, basically. And so all the numbers that you see here, the number on the left represents the THC concentration in those products. The number on the right represents the CBD concentration. We want patients, physicians, and pharmacists to always know exactly what it is that they're using or they're recommending. And we've also broken out our products into 3 main categories: CBD dominant in blue, THC dominant in orange, and then balanced products in silver. Because we know that cannabis seems complicated to a lot of patients and physicians. We're doing our best to simplify it and to be as clear as possible to our patients, to our physicians and pharmacists. And as I mentioned, we're really proud of this new relationship with Sandoz Canada. And as a result of this relationship, all of our non-flower products, so our drops and our oil products and our capsules, go out with the Sandoz Canada logo, which really builds up the confidence of pharmacists who recognize Sandoz as a leader in the pharmaceutical space. And that's been very well received in Canada and otherwise. And I also want to mention that Tilray does have a recreational division as well. Tilray as a brand is completely committed to patients. We're always going to be a medical brand. But we have a 100-acre farm in Inniskillen, Ontario, 13 acres of which is under glass. And there we produce recreational cannabis for the recreational market. And these are some of the brands that we've developed. Marley Natural, associated with this partnership with the Marley family. Arissa, which is more of a lifestyle brand. Good Chip, which is one of Washington State's top brand that we're bringing down into Canada as well as a number of other brands that are currently available in provinces across Canada. So we're really excited to be able to meet the needs of cannabis consumers in a really organic way around the nation and ultimately around the world. We also have a production facility in Portugal, which is taking care of our EU obligations as well. So Tilray right now has over 500 employees. We're one of the largest cannabis companies in the world, and we're really excited to grow with Canada and grow in the jurisdictions and contribute to the jurisdictions where we're producing, where we're distributing cannabis, to make sure that everyone can benefit from, if not the use of cannabis, the cannabis industry itself. And that's it for me. I really look forward to your questions, and I'm going to pass it over to my colleague from Canopy Growth.
Good. I'm not a walker. I'm a stander. Unlike my colleague Philippe. Yeah. Just get a deck up. So just while we're waiting for the deck to come up, I too would like to thank the organizers for inviting us today and for the hospitality of the Tsuut'ina Nation. So thank you very much for that. And Chief Day, it's an honor to be on the stage with you, sir. While we get the deck up, I also would like to join Philippe in wishing best wishes to Mr. Silver. We were sorry to hear that he'd taken ill over the weekend, and we wish him a full recovery. As Chief Day noted, my name is Sean Webster. I'm the Director of Government and Stakeholder Relations. I focus on the federal government and the government of Ontario, and I do a little bit of work too in the province of Quebec for Canopy Growth Corporation. Okay, there we go. What happened? Okay. Sorry. Try that again. Okay, so this makes my legal department happy. Any lawyers in the room can attest that I showed this slide. Not expecting to be read or to read it, but we're supposed to do that. So just a little bit about Canopy Growth. Canopy Growth is one of the world's leading diversified cannabis companies. We operate in 11 countries and 5 continents. Here in Canada, we have 10 world-class production facilities. As Philippe mentioned, and Aurora was up here earlier, we all are GMP certified. We have right now currently 4.3 million square feet under growth, with another 1.3 million square foot expansion underway right now. In terms of our, and I'll get into some of this later, but in terms of some of our brands. We're very heavily into the medical branding, which is where we all started, and that's our origin as a company, and now moving into the legal recreational market. We are traded on the Toronto Stock Exchange. Our ticker is WEED, and in the New York Stock Exchange as well, where our ticker is CGC. As Philippe mentioned, we did have a large investment come in earlier this year, which changed the governance and some of the nature of our company with the $5 billion investment by Constellation Brands. Constellation Brands include well-known brands such as Mia Me on the wine side, Corona, Modelo. They are based just outside of Rochester, New York. So they now own a significant portion of us, which is interesting, an American company investing in the Canadian cannabis industry. Okay. There we go. I'm either getting too far or too behind with this. Okay. In terms of our... How did you make this work, Philippe? Did you bugger? I think he's... If I didn't know Philippe well enough, I think he... Oh, there we go. So on the medical side, just so you're aware, our brands include Spectrum, which is very well known. Like the Tilray brands that Philippe spoke about, the Spectrum indicates the concentration of CBD and TBD. On the adult use side, Tweed is our main brand. As a matter of fact, most of our growing facilities are named Tweed in some way or another. And then we have these other brands. We also have affiliate brands. So you may have heard of Leafs by Snoop, which is quite a popular one. And then in our retail brands are either called Tweed Main Street or Tokyo Smoke on the recent acquisition that we made of Haiku brands for the retail side. In terms of our global medical cannabis leadership, as I mentioned before, we've had about 54,000 healthcare practitioner visits. We do run a certified medical education program. The Peer Catalyst Mentor program that's outlined on the stage, that is where we employ medical practitioners or contract with medical practitioners who are used to prescribing cannabis to help medical practitioners who are not used to prescribing cannabis how to prescribe cannabis. So it's a kind of a peer-to-peer education program that we run. In terms of our health innovations, we have two companies right now that focus within the Canopy group of families on health innovations. Canopy Health, which is based here in Canada, and then we recently launched Beckley Canopy, which is based in Oxford in the United Kingdom. So right now we have 39 patent applications filed with the US Patents Office, 15 human health trials, and we have 4 clinical trials right now underway in veterinary health. In terms of the Canadian recreational channel, we estimate that we're about 36% of the supply agreements signed to date, worth about 70,000 kilograms a year for provincial authorities right across the country. This is what our retail landscape looks like right now. It still says in process in Ontario because it still is in process, even though the regulations were announced last week. So we're waiting to see exactly what that's going to look like in Ontario. But we do have stores of our own and online sales to some extent right across the country. Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Newfoundland and Labrador, and then we supply the provinces that are using government-only distribution system. And as I mentioned before, our retail brands, which you'll see here in Western Canada and in Newfoundland and Labrador, would be Tweed or Tokyo Smoke. In terms of education, we have developed customer service representative training programs which have been used in the provinces. So New Brunswick and Prince Edward Island have used our customer service representative training, as well as our private stores in Newfoundland and in Manitoba and Saskatchewan. So far we've trained about 650 customer service representatives. In terms of our global footprint, just to give you an idea, a lot like Tilray, we are active all around the world. We have a very active international department. Canada, South America, Europe, Africa, and in Australia. With different formats, we do have production facilities in some, and we do export to others. In terms of really what we're here for today, with opportunities for Indigenous partnership. So I guess my main message to you here today is that we are open for business opportunities with Indigenous communities. I won't get into the details of them today, but we do have two that are actively being pursued right now, which we're very excited about, both in Manitoba and in Quebec, in various forms of negotiation. We don't believe in a one-size-fits-all approach to negotiating with Indigenous partners. We think each community is unique, and the type of business that we'll do on the community really depends on what type of business the community wants to do with us. So we don't take a cookie cutter. We want to approach this on a deal-by-deal basis. We think it's critical that we have very robust dialogue with community leaders if we are going to go in and do business of any type in an Indigenous community. And we have to make sure that we have full support of bands and councils to do so. So we would be looking to do a lot of work with bands and councils to ensure that we have that real community engagement. An earlier panel today, I heard the chief of this community talk about a referendum to make sure that they had full community support. So that's the type of thing that really we would be looking for as well, to make sure that we're going someplace where we're welcomed and where we want to be. So we think, just to summarize that, a local legislative structure is going to be key for long-term success. So if anybody here has some ideas of what their community or their company in their community might be looking to do with us, please come to us. We'd love to hear from you. We've got an email set up, bd@canopygrowth.com. You can come to us with ideas, and I promise we will get back to you and engage in discussion. Oops, I almost got it. So that's it for me. I look forward to hopefully answering any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, and again, this was very informative. What we've all known as First Nation communities and those that are taking up opportunities in the cannabis industry, that much of the landscape over the last few years has been pretty much occupied by big industry, and it's really important to underscore the importance of the federal government, the provinces and territories, acknowledging that as First Nations have been waiting, and as many have been, and don't get me wrong, there are a few that have said, we're just going to go ahead. But the majority of our communities have said, listen, we need to wait for this framework. We need to understand what the federal government is doing. And those are many of the communities that have been somewhat left behind. What we want to try to accomplish here is understanding what the opportunities are. With regard to this larger aspect of production, retail, the medicinal side, it seems to be a very developed landscape. And again, just put it out to the floor. What are some of your questions, comments, concerns, and things that you would like to know from these gentlemen and the companies that they represent? Listen, First Nation cannabis and economic sovereignty is really something that we want to be our plight. And we need to hear from you, and these gentlemen need to hear from you, because they're here today to listen and to find out where those opportunities might rest. So mic number one, please.
Check, check.
Here we go. Curious, you guys obviously want to do some work in the Indigenous community, which is great. What's the give back to the community? Is there a strategy that's in place already? Have you guys, I'm sure you guys have talked about it. I'm just curious what that looks like.
Sure. I'm happy to kick that off. I regularly meet with First Nation bands who are interested, and also Métis bands who are interested in, and Métis Nation who are interested in working within this economy. What I try and provide is an oversight of what we've been doing. I've been doing this for about 20 years, and to highlight where I think the opportunities exist. I want to be, really, really completely honest and suggest that I think that there are some opportunities that are much better than others. For example, I think that there's a lot of excitement right now around cannabis production, but I can tell you if we look south of the border, to see what, to try and get a sense of what's going to happen here in Canada, we get a good sense of what the future holds. And in the south of the border, in Washington State, in Colorado, in Nevada, and California, when they legalized the recreational use of cannabis, they saw a significant shortage of product for the first few months. And part of that is because people are ordering more than they would normally, they're using more than they would normally, and it causes a draw. And we're not dealing with regular purchasing patterns. And of course, here in Canada, we had a very similar impact as well on October 17th. And for the last few weeks, you've probably heard and read about some of the shortages that have happened. But I do want to point out that within 12 to 18 months, all of those jurisdictions ended up with a cannabis surplus. Once all of the square footage came online, once all of the growers were licensed, once cannabis was really flowing, I was in Oregon last year, and they have too many retailers. This is according to the governor, who's super supportive of the industry, and too much cannabis. And they're trying to find ways to be able to export cannabis from Oregon into California, where they're now going through shortages as well. So, long story short, I think that there's a lot of excitement around production right now, but if your goal is to produce cannabis and you're starting right now and you're planning on producing it 18 months, so you're probably not going to have anything available for 18 to 24 months, you're going to be coming into a very different market than you are right now. You're going to be coming into a market where the margins are going to be pennies per gram, not dollars per gram. You're going to be coming into a market which is going to be flooded with cannabis products. And I'm not saying it's going to be the value of tomatoes, but it's not going to have the same value it does today. So one of the pieces of advice that I give folks is, instead of looking at production, which is right now the hot item, and the value of cannabis producers right now is incredibly high. You're talking to folks from Canopy Growth and Tilray. We're familiar with those high valuations. But to me, the retail end is the end that bears development. That's where, if I'm looking right now and I'm starting right now in this industry, I don't want to be a cannabis producer 2 years from now. I want to be a retailer, or to be a subsidiary that's going to help those retailers, whether it be through tech or otherwise. So that's a little bit of the advice that I give when I'm talking to First Nations bands and Métis Nation when they reach out. But one of the other things I want to mention is, really, I'm not here in any way, and I talked to Howard Silver a little bit about this last week. My goal here today, and Tilray's goal, is not to look for investors. My goal here, I've got one single purpose. I'm looking for allies to help get NIHB coverage for medical cannabis for all First Nations in Canada. I'm going to be sharing data later that shows the patterns of use of First Nations who are patients of Tilray. And I have a single goal, is that First Nations patients in Canada should never have to pay for their cannabis. It should be absolutely covered by NIHB. They should never have to worry about cost being an impediment to access. So really, my goal is here today, and I'm happy to fill other goals and to provide advice or otherwise. But my sole purpose for being here is to try and find ways for us to get NIHB for cannabis for First Nations in Canada. That's where it should be, and that's where I hope to get us in the next, along with everyone in this room, I hope, over the next 12 or 18 months.
I think we all think that that's very important. And so thank you for your efforts that you're putting forth to make that happen for all of us in the room.
So, Sean, you want to provide some commentary on that? And I want to come back to the NIHB piece there in a minute. So go ahead, Sean.
So, I'll just join 150% with Philippe, re-NIHB. I spent a lot of time before I came into the cannabis industry, except for a couple of years when I was in the energy business. Most of my career has been in the pharmaceutical industry on the public affairs side. And I remember when I first started in the public affairs and the pharmaceutical business, NIHB was like the gold standard. If there was a drug number provided to a new pharmaceutical product in Canada, it was pretty much automatically listed on NIHB, and something changed. And unfortunately, that's not happening anymore. NIHB is not the gold standard it once was, and we really need to get it back there. So I'll just join. In terms of your original, I'll join with Philippe, which I do most of the time. So in terms of giving back into the communities, I would say the key message comes back to we're open for business and partnership. So it's not about us going in to First Nations and starting a facility or starting some sort of a retail and owning it. It would be about partnering and building Indigenous businesses as partners of ours. And working closely in those communities to build strong businesses and strong partnerships through those businesses.
Yeah, and I think I'd just like to underscore that I think many of us are wondering, like, what's left for First Nation communities? And I would suggest that, you know, it will be about the business relationship, but it will also be about those partners that are willing to be creative in terms of where the opportunities might be in the value chain for First Nation communities. And I think when you see a big multinational corporation that's already entrenched in the cannabis industry come at you, like you kind of wonder if you can even handle that. But if there is a relationship that's established, I think that will be critical. Like, there are opportunities in the value chain, and we do need access to capital resolved. There's the bigger issue of supply. Like, you folks have that covered. But possibly there are other opportunities where we've got other folks that are part of the value chain in the First Nation side that need that supply. And that may need those price points and those margins to be just enough to be able to create some equity position. And I think that's going to be really critical to find out exactly where we fit into that landscape. I do want to highlight the issue of NIHB because it's really important to underscore that, you know, that's our benefit. You know, that's a fiduciary obligation of the Crown, and it's a treaty right to have that benefit. So we may become a little bit skeptical when we see big industry say, we want to help you resolve that because it may mean something back for us. I think it's fair to say that if we're going to walk down that path of resolving the NIHB, getting that dim number, that we will need to actually figure out how we work with industry on that so that way it benefits us in a value-added way. So I want to point that out, and I don't want to leave that just hanging there. So mic number 2, please.
Hi there. I just wanted to ask a question. I'm not sure how to word it, but I'm looking more towards industry wants to work with First Nations, but I see the barrier as the government, meaning that as an Indigenous entrepreneur, it looks like I have to choose between a white label federal market or an Indigenous market that might be exclusive of that. Is there a way that industry on its own accord can lobby for that framework, that federal framework that will synthesize? So, yeah.
So I think the question is if there are opportunities there, and within the current framework, we know that the rapid rate in which the legislation came out, there were those that already had the insights, the investment, and even, dare I say, some government folks that were in ministries and ministers and police commissioners who are in the industry already, right? We know this. How do we work with the framework now? And how do we ensure that industry can say to government, listen, we got a First Nation partner, and here's what's important in terms of ensuring that we do right by our partner. I think that's the essence of some of that discussion.
Well, what I can share, which I think is encouraging, is that in recent discussions that I've had with Health Canada, and particularly the Cannabis Directorate, they recognize the need to diversify this industry so that it's inclusive of First Nations goals, First Nations achievements, and First Nations opportunities. I'm really encouraged to see that Health Canada and Todd Kane was here yesterday. that Sarah is still here today and that they're taking those responsibilities really seriously. I think that ultimately, these are business. This is about business. And so a good business proposal, whether it comes from a First Nations band or whether it comes from a traditional industry, is going to be given serious consideration by companies like Tilray and by Canopy Growth. And so my suggestion would be to, if you've got a great idea, if you've got a good idea, if you've got an open market, if you've got something original, take the steps to develop as far as you can, to add as much value to it as possible, and then share it out to look for those partnerships. And ultimately, I think that business is, in many ways, blind to race, to background, anything else. Business will be evaluated based on whether or not it can be mutually beneficial for a partnership to develop. And I think that that's the way that it's going to work as well when it comes to First Nation partnerships within the cannabis industry. I think if you've got a great idea and you're an entrepreneur and you want to bring something to market, if that idea has value, it will travel and it will gain momentum based on the strength of that idea as well.
Yeah, just to add on to what Philippe said, I totally agree. If it's something is a solid business proposal, it's a solid business proposal. If access to capital is an issue, there's ways to find capital. Business will always find, it's like those 2 rules of plumbing, right? Water always runs downhill and paydays on Friday. If there's an opportunity and it makes good business sense, we can find the capital. We have part of Canopy has a separate company called Canopy Rivers, and that's specifically what they're in the business for, is to provide venture capital funding for cannabis startups. So, we've got the capital. Constellation Brands gave us a lot of money to look at new product lines and new things that we can do. So, if something makes business sense and we can build a partnership out of it, it's something that we can certainly look at.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mic number 1, please.
Hi. This comment and question is more for Philippe. I am so sorry. I met you 3 years ago and I turned up my nose to you at the Aboriginal Business Match because I wasn't interested in cannabis, and my clients would leave me, and they're actually the ones who got me into cannabis. So I apologize profusely. And as I own a business in Port Alberni, I'm a medicine woman, and you talk about the NAHB. The workaround may be that they're changing in BC anyways, to pay for the traditional healer's time. They'll pay medical patient travel, but not for the time. If they hypothetically are gonna pass this and a traditional healer such as myself uses infused oils or a salve on someone coming to see me, that might be a workaround that we have until they actually approve it. So you have our support in pushing for the benefits, because we have people in our nation making Bear Grease, Devil's Club, and cannabis infused salve. And if you have arthritis or sorry, I can't make claims, but this stuff works really well, and we traditionally made it. So please continue fighting for NAHB, talking to FNHA, because people like us are here and you have the face time to advocate for us. So thank you so much for what you're doing, and there may be a workaround. It's just figuring out the steps to make it work.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And don't worry about 3 years ago. I'm so happy to see you here today, and I'm so happy that you're following a path that you feel is leading you in the right direction right now. My role in this, in terms of seeking for NAHB coverage, is just purely as an ally. What I do is I gather research and I gather data. For 20 years, my whole modus operandi, my raison d'etre, the reason what gets me up in the morning is increasing access to patients. And one of the biggest obstacles to access across Canada and across the world to medical cannabis is cost. And so I not only work to try and get, NAHB coverage, I try and get private payer coverage. I try and remove the taxation on medical cannabis. I've been doing that for over 10 years. And I'm trying to make sure that, you know, ultimately patients don't have to decide and make that choice of buying food that they can put in their fridge or buying the medicine that allows them to use that food ultimately. What I want to offer everyone here in this room is access to some data that I gathered. And so you'll see some of the data that I've got from our survey from 2017. And what I've done is isolate out some of the First Nations and Métis responses so that everyone can learn more about how First Nations and Métis are using medical cannabis already in Canada to try and better understand those pathways for NIHB and for us to move forward. And I've reached out to Assembly of First Nation and to the BC First Nations Health Authority to be able to share that data. And I've given them the raw data for them to use in reports and use in their own analysis. And I'm willing to do that with anyone who comes and, you know, who has academic goals to try and analyze this data, to publish it, to use it in reports, or to move this discussion forward. So that's what I have to offer. It's not much, but I find that it can be very helpful, that ultimately science is about slaying myths. And I think that ultimately that's what we can do here with the data that I'm sharing, showing that cannabis, for example, for many people is not a gateway drug, but it's an exit drug to addiction and to drug dependence. And so now we can take science to try and slay some of the misunderstandings or misimpressions that people have around the medical use of cannabis or the recreational use of cannabis. So thank you so much for your comments today and for being here today and for sharing even our experience 3 years ago. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. And Philippe will be on, I guess, the next panel, correct?
So yeah,
And,
I think it's coming up shortly anyway.
Again,
Sorry, I broke the clicker.
any final comments, Sean, Philippe?
I just really, as was mentioned, you know, about 3 years ago, there was an Aboriginal Business Match Conference where about 100 folks gathered in Vancouver to look at the opportunity of medical cannabis and for First Nations. And it's amazing to see the size and the development that's happened since then. There are a number of First Nations bands across Canada that have partnered already with licensed producers. You know, I work with, you know, I've got allies across the industry, including North 48, that have First Nations ownership of that licensed producer. Canopy Growth, that's worked with Phil Fontaine over the years in order to do this, in order to reach out into First Nations communities as well. So please keep it up. Look forward. This is an incredibly expansive industry. There is room for everyone. There's opportunity for everyone. And I wish you all the best of luck. I wish you all strength and fortitude, because I have to tell you, nothing teaches you patience like working on drug policy reform or cannabis reform. I've been doing this for 20 years, and it takes a while sometimes to move the needle. But we are finally a leader in this space internationally, and it would be a shame if First Nations across Canada didn't have a chance to benefit from that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Just a final commentary then, and I think it's a really good point that you're making to conclude the session, and it's the fact that, you know, industry, those that are locked into the space now, some excellent leaders, and I want to just point out that, you know, it's not all gloom and doom for us either. We do have some very reputable, strong business minds that are actually securing these opportunities. And I think it's really important to recognize that we don't always need to look outside. We need to look within. And, you know, it's been stated here even by a community elder that, you know, we have the answers in our own communities. I think what will be important as we look at what the relationship looks like and how the Indigenous community starts to participate in a much more substantive way, before the business deal, I think we have to examine the relationship. Two parts to that is, what is our relationship with industry, the private sector? And I think the private sector needs to realize that we've been given a bum deal by government, and that there's a disadvantaged starting point that we're having to deal with, not just on the access to capital side, but, you know, with respect to where we do business and who we can do business with. I heard some issues with regards to creative ways and access to capital. I heard about the the whole issue of drug benefits. When you look at the spectrum of the beneficiaries within that space, it's the recreational user, the medicinal user, and the actual business. And we need to really figure that space out, and we do need good partners. And again, we want to thank you for being here. Again, let's give these gentlemen a big round of applause, and we'll move on to the next session.
Thank you so much.
Rich.
Thank you, Chief.